Freud and Fliess, the letters that started psychoanalysis.
So everyone knows the name Sigmund Freud, right? But what if I told you that psychoanalysis, his whole revolutionary theory of the mind, wasn't born in some stuffy university office? Nope. It was actually forged in the fire of a super intense, secret, and, well, ultimately doomed friendship. Just take a look at this. This isn't just some casual note between pals. It is a total lifeline. In 1893, Sigmund Freud wrote this to his confidant, a guy named Wilhelm Fliess. And it just perfectly captures this incredible dependency, this intellectual fire that defined their whole relationship. For Freud, you see, talking to Fliess wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was an absolute necessity.
Now, to really get why, you have to picture Vienna in the late 1800s. Freud was the struggling neurologist, and his ideas about things like hysteria and the unconscious, they weren't just seen as radical. The medical community thought he was basically a heretic. He was completely on the outside, totally isolated.
I mean, just listen to how vulnerable Freud sounds in his own words to Fliess. He feels scientifically dulled, resigned. Fliess wasn't just a friend to bounce ideas off of, he was the source of Freud's entire professional self-worth. He was pretty much the only person who made Freud feel like his groundbreaking work had any value at all.
So you've got these two guys. On one side, there's Freud, the total outsider in Vienna, wading into the murky, uncharted waters of the human psyche. And on the other, you have Wilhelm Fliess, a well-respected ear, nose, and throat specialist over in Berlin, focused on the body, on biorhythms. They were in completely different worlds, really, and yet they shared this burning ambition to uncover life's biggest secrets.
So their friendship, it didn't happen in cafes or meeting rooms. It was built almost entirely through letters. For more than 10 years, they sent this flood of ideas back and forth. We're talking over 1,000 letters between Vienna and Berlin. This correspondence became their private laboratory, a secret workshop where the core concepts of psychoanalysis were first hammered out.
And man, did Freud crave Fliess's approval. He saw him as this super smart, tough critic. So when Fliess actually gave him praise, it was like a shot of adrenaline, divine validation. This emotional fuel was absolutely crucial. It's what gave Freud the guts to keep pushing forward with theories that literally everyone else was calling crazy.
So, what were these wild ideas that Fliess was cooking up? Well, they were bold, to say the least. He came up with this thing called nasal reflex neurosis, basically connecting the nose to sexuality. He was convinced there were these universal biorhythms, a 23-day cycle for men and a 28-day cycle for women that controlled everything. And, a really important one, he proposed that all human beings were fundamentally bisexual.
And Freud? He was all in. At least, he was at first. There was no skepticism, not yet. He was just totally fascinated, pulled in by how big and bold Fliess's thinking was. It just goes to show how desperate Freud was for a partner in crime, someone who was willing to explore the weird, uncharted territories of human nature right alongside him.
Okay, so this whole collaboration builds, and it leads to the most critical period of their friendship. This is where a personal tragedy in Freud's life actually sparks his greatest intellectual achievement, with Fliess as his one and only witness.
So in 1896, Freud's father dies, and this forces Freud to turn his analytical microscope inward onto himself. He starts analyzing his own dreams, which was something nobody had ever really done with that kind of scientific focus before. And who does he share every single raw, unfiltered thought with? Wilhelm Fliess. This intense period of self-exploration, all performed for an audience of one, leads directly to his masterpiece, The Interpretation of Dreams.
You can just feel the pure joy of discovery in this letter to Fliess. It's a genuine eureka moment. For Freud, it was like the lights just suddenly switched on. He felt like he'd found a master key that could unlock not just his own mind, but the very determinants of consciousness. His whole intellectual machine was finally starting to hum.
And one of the most famous parts of that machine? The Oedipus complex. But here's the thing. Freud didn't unveil this huge idea in some medical journal. He first worked it out in a letter to Fliess, using Shakespeare's Hamlet as a case study. He basically argued that Hamlet's famous hesitation came from an unconscious sense of guilt because the new king had done the very thing Hamlet secretly wanted to do.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? As Freud's own theories got sharper and more powerful, they started to collide with the very ideas from Fliess that had once inspired him. The ground that had united them was starting to crack.
And you can see it right here. They were just heading in completely different directions. Freud was diving deeper and deeper into the world of psychology, of interpretation, repression, fantasy. Meanwhile, Fliess was getting more and more rigid about biology, about calculation, biorhythms, and yep, still the human nose. The gap between them was becoming a canyon.
Wow. This letter from Freud is actually kind of heartbreaking when you think about it. He's admitting that while Fliess can still kind of follow his journey into the mental frontiers, he just can't return the favor. Fliess's theories about celestial frontiers, his cosmic biorhythms, they just seem totally alien to Freud now. Their conversation had become a one-way street.
So that intellectual respect started to curdle into doubt. Fliess became more rigid, more obsessed with his numbers and cycles. He started making some really bizarre claims, like linking left-handedness to homosexuality. For Freud, who was trying to build a science on careful, nuanced interpretation, this kind of rigid thinking just became impossible to stomach.
The end was coming. It was going to be messy and painful. But here's the crazy paradox. The death of this friendship was the very thing that allowed psychoanalysis to finally be born as a real, worldwide movement.
Their final meeting in the summer of 1900 was a total disaster. It just devolved into this bitter fight, with Fliess basically accusing Freud of stealing his idea about bisexuality. And just like that, the trust that had held them together for a decade just evaporated in a single, ugly argument. The friendship was completely over.
And you can just hear the hurt in Freud's letter after the fight. He felt the accusation was totally unjust, a deep betrayal. After all those years of being Fliess's biggest supporter, Freud was now being painted as a thief. His audience of one had turned on him, and he was profoundly alone all over again.
And yet, here's the twist. The breakup, as personally devastating as it was, turned out to be professionally liberating. Freed from needing Fliess's approval, Freud started writing for the world. His huge, foundational works, like The Interpretation of Dreams, finally found the audience they deserved. Suddenly, the lonely Viennese neurologist wasn't so lonely anymore. He started attracting followers, and they formed the very first psychoanalytic circle. He didn't need an audience of one anymore, because he was busy creating a global movement.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. This friendship was the incubator for Freud's ideas. It gave him the confidence to be a rebel. And yet, it seems like it had to die for his ideas to truly take flight. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the strange, complicated role that our most intense relationships, even the ones that fail, play in our greatest achievements.